you. A couple of things that struck me about the Karen Gould exhibit. I had a chance to look at it some yesterday, and I looked through and read the catalog, and a couple of things came to my mind. By the way, I'm David Timmerman, Dean of the faculty here at Monmouth College. Glad to be here. Two things came to my mind when I looked at the collection and read from this reference guide. One is that a lot of people, scholars and then students who look at this, like to imagine that at least in the Western tradition, we moved from an oral culture to a written culture to a visual culture. And that's a nice, tidy timeline. It has conceptual clarity to it. But the truth is, we've been moving back and forth the whole time. And this illuminated manuscript collection from the Middle Ages is an example of that, of how, well, in particular, written text and visual markings on that text come back together. So that neat timeline doesn't turn out to be true. I also imagine, sort of interestingly, if some of our students who are here today, if we first said to them, we have a collection of illuminated text, they might think of a computer screen or a Kindle, right? And so that's kind of interesting. And the second thing that interests me are some of the texts related to what today we might call study Bibles. So you have the glossed Bible. You have Peter Lombard's Book of Four Sentences. You have the interpretation of Hebrew names. And these are all texts that came in and helped to illuminate or provide context for the biblical text. And just as getting prepared for this afternoon, I decided I would do something that came to mind. I typed a study Bible into Amazon.com, and over 100,000 hits. But here we have likely an earlier version of a study Bible in multiple forms. So it's exciting to see you here this afternoon. It's exciting for Monmouth College to be hosting this collection for a time, and it's my honor and privilege to introduce our visiting distinguished professor of history, Louis Gould.
Thank you, Dean Timmerman, and I also want to thank President Disler for his support of this endeavor. I'm going to do two things. First, thank a bunch of people, and then say some words about Karen. First, I need to thank Marilyn Carbonell of the Nelson Atkins Museum, whose kindness made everything possible. Rick Sayer of the Hay Hughes Library, who drove to Kansas City to bring the leaves to Monmouth. And especially Mary Phillips, whose knowledge and good taste animated this wonderful exhibit. Tom Sinkowitz, who has publicized this exhibition with his special flair as a teacher and scholar, and Brother Thomas Sullivan, who will soon explain the significance of the collection. And then the Monmouth students who put the exhibit together under Mary's direction, Kyle Dixon, Tia Graham, and Karina Moschello. And I also want to thank Karen's friends and former students who make today so special, have such special meaning for me. And I owe special personal thanks to Stacy, Simon, and Gareth Cordry, for whom, let me just borrow the words of Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, and the song from beginning to end, I found in the heart of a friend. Karen would have been so pleased to see her collection with the contributions of her dear friend Linda Voigt displayed in this attractive setting. Karen felt a deep curiosity and understanding of the underlying intellectual order of the medieval and Renaissance world that these leaves reflect. To share the insights she found in researching these works of art with her students and the public always seemed to her a noble calling. She gave of herself with unstinting kindness. After she died, a dear friend told me that Karen lived the life of the mind until she could do no more. In the time she had, her work included 1 peer-reviewed book with the Medieval Academy, 6 peer-reviewed articles, including 2 with Art Bulletin, a journal with a tiny acceptance rate, 29 book reviews in scholarly journals, 53 encyclopedia contributions, and 33 reviews in the Gill's Literary Annual in print or online. This exhibition attests to the courage of her spirit that surmounted trauma, pain, and tragedy to leave us all an enduring legacy of scholarship and richer knowledge about our common heritage. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm Marilyn Carbonell, the head of library services from the Nelson Atkins Museum of Art in Kansas City. And it is my pleasure to be here today to celebrate with you the life of Karen Gould and the splendid collection that this remarkable teacher-scholar assembled. Dr. Julian Zugasagoitia, the director and COO of the Nelson Atkins Museum of Art, extends his greetings to each of you today as well. And he has sent his greetings to the college and especially to our friend, Professor Lewis Gould, and to all of you who are gathered here today. Now, before my task is actually to introduce Brother Thomas, but I would like to thank again Professor Lewis Gould and Professor Linda Ursom-Boytz, a medieval scholar and dear friend of Karen's, for their gifts which form what we call the foundation collection of the Karen Gould collection. This teaching collection holds pride of place in the library, the Spencer Art Reference Library. The Karen Gould collection supports the museum's mission, not only of art stewardship, but teaching, learning, and scholarship in the visual arts. This is all very important and key to our goals. As part of this commitment to scholarship, the Karen Gould collection will be fully digitized and freely available to anyone online in the Digital Scriptorium, which is an international project currently housed at UC Berkeley in the Bancroft Library. As part of the preparation for this collection, which came to the library in 2012, there are currently 10 documents online with excellent scholarly annotations from Brother Thomas and Professor Boytz, and I brought along some samples from printouts from the Digital Scriptorium. I don't know if Brother Thomas is going to mention this, so I will. The foundation collection of 31 manuscripts, the main corpus is from Karen Gould. There are 4 new additional manuscripts. This is where the power of a friend can lead to more friends and strengthen the collection. We now have 4 new additions to this collection, 2 which are coming very shortly from England that were acquired based on the collection development policy to add additional documents, which are legal documents, English documents, a German document, and another French document. And we have acquired these this year, again through the generosity of Lou Gould and the committee who worked with me on this collection. We are just absolutely thrilled. So we couldn't wait to tell you that, even though they are not here. Also, 2 additional manuscripts, an Italian legal document, and another missal were contributed by David Weinglass and myself. The Nelson Atkins Museum thanks Monmouth College for this opportunity to share the Karen Gould collection, which is displayed in the lovely exhibition in the Hughes Library. I would like to add my special note of thanks to Dean Timmerman for his support for this project, to Professor Tom Sinkowitz and his students, and to my librarian colleague, Richard Sayer, the director of this library, and to Mary Phillips, the curator of the college art collection. I would just like to mention, in talking with, if I may call you just Tom, instead of Professor Tom, Tom mentioned that his students have an assignment to actually study the manuscript leaves which are on display here, which was just perfect. And they have an assignment to write, a writing assignment dealing with the manuscripts. And I have asked, with the students' permission, if you might share those commentaries with us in the library, because this is a perfect expression of a movement in libraries to involve students in as student curators. So we currently have special collections on various topics. The latest one was on Frida Kahlo, Diego Rivera, and the Mexican modernists. And the student written label, and there are strict guidelines about what the format as well as how it is to be arranged, alongside, not below, the curator's label. And so when we talk about this collection and share this collection with students from the Kansas City area, I would like to show the papers from Monmouth College with this endeavor for student scholarship. The other thing that I wanted to just mention is, as this collection resides in the Spencer Art Reference Library, so it is one of my duties, but it's also a pleasure to be here to actually check on, this is part of the curatorial role, on the display of the collection, because these are priceless treasures. And I just want to thank Mary, because Mary has been the prime mover for the display of the collection, beautifully done and preserving along the guidelines that we have in the museum for the display and also for the loan of special collections materials. So I'd just like to thank you both for that. Now, your program, so now I'm going to switch to my friend, Brother Thomas. Brother Thomas, we are also deeply indebted to Brother Thomas of the Nelson because he assisted with the examination and documentation of the Karen Gould collection manuscripts and wrote and beautifully produced the collection booklet which you have, that Dean Timmerman referenced. Now, Brother Thomas has a very interesting career. Brother Thomas is a Benedictine monk from Conception Abbey in Missouri, and he also has a PhD in history from the University of University of Wisconsin, Madison, and also an MA in library science. Brother Thomas is professor of history and humanities at Conception Seminary College, and also serves as the librarian of the Abbey and the Seminary Library. Brother Thomas's publication record, if you look it up at worldcat.org, is most impressive, and several of his publications are on the table, and I encourage you to look at them. In addition to scholarly monographs, and I'm trying to hurry because Brother Thomas is the main speaker, he has published articles dealing with the College of Cluny in Paris and the Faculty of Theology in Paris and the quadlibetical disputations of monks and canons and other university topics. Now, Brother Thomas has two current research projects which I find quite fascinating. One is a biographical register of the Parisian Masters of Theology who taught or studied between 1300 and 1373. Now, the other fits in with my interest in the economics of culture. He is working on a database of payments to the Holy See, which will allow the establishment of the relative worth of monasteries between 1350 and 1500. Brother Thomas is a frequent speaker and presenter at medieval studies conferences, so I asked his permission to tell you this anecdote. Because I don't know Monmouth's schedule, but at the University of Missouri, Kansas City, where I'm a visiting professor in art history, it's midterm time in papers, and so the students are in our library at the museum, the art history students. Several years ago, Brother Thomas presented a paper at the Mid-America Medieval Association Conference, and he was the hit. His paper, with the students, the fellow faculty, because his paper dealt with 4 disgruntled student monks at Montpellier who rebelled against their professor of canon law, not because of his overbearing manner, although that may have factored into it, but it was for the heavy homework assignments. And this got to the point where they plotted to kill him. And luckily for their professor and for the students, they were unsuccessful. But I don't know what happened to their permanent transcripts. Brother Thomas will have to tell you that. And I have one other thing, and Tom Sinkwith, this is another example of the great care with which the programming for this exhibition suggested that I might remind you that he purchased this. How many of you have actually felt goat skin parchment hands? Okay, good. There are some, but not all of us have. Or Count Scott parchment from the late 19th century, 90s. Tom purchased this for the students. This is from Cowley's Parchment and Vellum stamps. You can actually touch these, and we encourage you to do so, and it is in the college gallery, so and to pass this amongst yourself, so that if you've not had the opportunity to work with parchment, you will have you have it with these. Now it is finally my great pleasure and honor to introduce to all of you today Brother Thomas Sullivan, who is a true scholar librarian, and welcome.
I always get nervous at these things when everyone says, "Oh, we're really looking forward to your talk," and my list of accomplishments. Actually, the 3 or 4 students who tried to murder their canon law professor was a monk as well. Nothing seems to have happened. What we have are the records of the visitation and the special document provided to the Holy See, because the founder of the college was Pope Urban V, and he was very interested in what was going on there. They had the visitation, and I've been able to trace a few of them for years afterwards, and nothing happened to them. They just get murder with impunity. Yeah, let me make sure I have everything on there. The title of my talk is The World Revealed in the Karen Gould Collection. Is this too loud or too soft or reverberant? Before beginning my presentation of The World Revealed in the Karen Gould Collection, I'd like to thank the same list of honorees: Marilyn Carbonell of the Spencer Art Reference Library at the Nelson, Kansas City, Louis Gould, Tom and Ann Sinkowitz for their gracious hospitality and wonderful cooking, and all those here at Monmouth who have made the exhibit possible, especially Mary Phillips, who staged the exhibit, and Richard Sayre, who provided the space for the exhibit and the technology for this afternoon. Most importantly, I'd like to thank and acknowledge Karen Gould, whose eye and interest brings us this collection at the heart of this talk and this exhibit. Nelson. The first document I'm going to look at is a piece of scripture, a text of scripture, and this is KG 10. It is the text of the first and second book of Maccabees, and the conclusion of the first chapter and the beginning of the first 2 chapters of the second book. Of the 4 books of Maccabees found in certain manuscripts of the Septuagint, the first 3 are included in the canon of the Eastern Church, and the first 2 in that of the Roman Church. Books are included among the Apocrypha in the non-Roman Catholic English Bibles. This Bible was printed by J.R. Drininger in Strasbourg in 1497. It's an incunable, and for those who don't know what an incunable is, it means it was printed before 1500. So in the collection we have a number of incunables and a number now of post-incunable. Incunable is just a dating thing. And the word incunable comes from incunabula, which are the swaddling clothes that Jesus was wrapped in. The word in Latin means infancy, is related to infancy. So these are all in this collection, but one that I'm showing today are incunables. This is the city of Strasbourg. Whoops, yes, Strasbourg. From the Nuremberg Chronicle, I just put it in because we have a Nuremberg Chronicle at our monastery from our mother house in Switzerland at Engelberg. This Nuremberg Chronicle was printed in 1493, just 4 years before this folio that we're going to look at. The second book of Maccabees is particularly important in medieval Christian theology because it contains sacred scripture's most explicit mention of creation ex nihilo in 2 Maccabees chapter 7, book 28, verse 28. And it's the earliest scriptural support for the practice of prayers for the dead. And you have that in the 12th chapter of 2 Maccabees, verse 45. The first was the issue with the reception of Aristotle in the 13th century, and the second, the practice of prayers for the dead, became a problem in the Reformation, the Revolution, we might call it, from our standpoint, in the Middle Ages. And you can see why it might not be included in the canonical books because of its reference, they may have been working post hoc, its reference to prayers for the dead and the ability to pray and the need to pray for the dead. The collection as we have it is not entirely 100% devoted to theological topics, but quite a few are. And so today I'd like to begin looking at the manuscripts with slide 8. This is a glossed text, and then we'll go to, this is a copy of a text from Peter Lombard's Book of the Sentences. And I'll talk about it in more detail in a few minutes, but if you look in the back exhibit, here we just found this out noticed this about an hour ago. It looks like that page there, that folio in the back, it's in a special display case, is taken either from the same workshop, they're about the same time, and these, let's see, the recto, the distinction number or the chapter number is very similar, and we're going to try to compare them to see if we can start hooking them together. It's one of the values of digital scriptoria. It becomes a record of what you own and what you have. First of all, in case someone steals it. Secondly, if you want to compare and begin to reconstruct manuscripts that have been separated, unfortunately, and sold as separate pieces. Now, the 12th century saw the Glossa Ordinaria. The 12th century saw the emergence of a standardized synthesis of the commentaries that had been welling up in and around the margins of the Christian Bible and between the lines of the Christian Bible. This is called the Glossa Ordinaria. The same century also saw the beginning of the emergence of the sentences of Peter Lombard. Let me go back a second. Peter Lombard on the right and the Glossa Ordinaria on the left. This commentary tradition on the sentences continued until the 17th century. Karen Gould Collection 3 is an incunable leaf from the Glossa Ordinaria, and that just means a gloss is a comment. You could either explain the word, explain the meaning, refer to some other text, and they became standardized over the years. The whole gloss Bible, if you ever get it printed out, is supposed to be 21 volumes long. It was very important for theological studies. This incunable leaf was printed at Nuremberg from the Nuremberg Chronicle in 1497 by a man named Anton Koberger. Koberger was godfather to Albrecht Dürer and published the Nuremberg Chronicle in 1493, and it became a very important text. Now, the Glossa Ordinaria is the ubiquitous text of the Central Middle Ages. For more than a century, from about 1140 on, copies of the gloss were made and distributed in large numbers in much of Europe. Even when its late 13th century heyday had passed, manuscript copies continued to be made into the 17th century, as well as printed editions such as Karen Gould Collection 13. The Dowie editors of the Glossa Ordinari in 1617 argued that to read the Bible without the gloss was to read a Bible which could not speak. They said, quotation, "When Scripture speaks with it, that is the gloss, we understand. But when we read the sacred words without the gloss, we think we hear a language we do not know." So to a certain degree, it seems like Scripture, or the gloss is becoming a form of Scripture or a sacred addition to Scripture, but there was this impulse not to separate the text. Now the first book we have from Maccabees, it's a separate text, but the Catholic editors, and we haven't had the Reformation yet, usually published them with the gloss attached, and I was interested to see that this Karen Gould one did not have that. The verso leaf shown here presents a text of St. Paul's epistle to the Hebrews, chapter 2, verses 1 through 7, with its gloss compiled by Anselm of Rouen as part of his personal project to gloss the whole of the biblical text. The recto of the sheet, which deals with the glosses for the conclusion of the first chapter of the epistle to the Hebrews, shows a section called the replica. You can't see it, but it's right here. As time went on in the Middle Ages, they began to add more and more text to the gloss. You had the original gloss, and then you had Nicholas of Lyra's postille, and you have in this particular sheet, Nicholas of Lyra was a Franciscan. A bishop from Burgos named Paulus Burgensis was a secular. He criticized Nicholas of Lyra for concentrating only on the literal understanding of the Bible and not the other three senses of understanding. So the replica was made by a man named Matthias Düring, who was Franciscan, who wanted to defend the Franciscan interpretation. So in these Bibles you have, in this one in particular, you have the gloss from the 12th and 13th century, then you have the Nicholas of Lyra's remarks, then Paul of Burgos's remarks, then you have the reply to Paul of Burgos to give you the whole picture of the gloss. We cannot understand the value of the Glossa Ordinaria without discussing the layout of the pages. And this is an early text, you can see from the first half of the 12th century. And you see the text of Scripture in the middle column, and the commentaries on the left and right margins, and in between the lines you have the interlinear glosses. Those were usually more simple, explaining a word and like, and the glosses in the margins were more narrative and more commentary and extended. You can see here, we mentioned earlier, the dean did the movement from reading to watching or looking at and then to studying. You can see that this probably, in the early part, was a text that was made to be read aloud. That is, the lecturer, the reader, read the text and had before him his comments. And some of these were the actual comments from the gloss, and some of these are comments that the professor himself would have written. And this is a very nice example of early and very easy to read glosses. The gloss also went into canon law in different areas, and they were so convoluted, I don't know how anyone found, you had to really study, be introduced to the study of the glosses to look at these. The decoration of the gloss could be original, could be added, could be all kinds of things, and frequently we don't know if the illustration is consonant in time with the writing of the gloss. But you have a very simple initial in this P on the left, and then a more elaborate, and these are both what's called the simple format of the gloss. And these on the left are from the Gospel of Luke. And you have, it took me a while to figure out what these people were, but this is Zachary in the temple offering the incense. And then the angel telling him, no, you call the kid John, remember, and then he comes up and says, I can't, he couldn't speak because he didn't want to do this. And these people up here are the people in the courtyard waiting for Zachary to come out after he offered incense in the Holy of Holies. Of course, texts that are probably made up stories to illustrate points, but they're not fact, but maybe truth about the scripture. Here we see a fully glossed Bible without the, and remember here, this is the gloss, but on the other side, the recto side, you had the commentary. Here you just have the gloss on either sides of the text. And by the time of the 15th century, you can see that the glosses have become much easier to read and find. But what they've done is taken the text of Scripture, chapter 2 right there. This is on Hebrews. And you have in this little column letters of the alphabet from A through Z. And so when you're reading you have the text here, the gloss note, on the side, and then you have an A and a B to separate this column from that column. And what they're trying to do is present the gloss in a printed form, which is harder to manage than if they were trying to do the complex forms or even the simple forms of the gloss. They'd waste a lot of space and the like. So what they did was combine the interlinear glosses, which were the shorter ones, and just print them in order in the columns around. It became a very time-consuming typesetting procedure, but it saved a lot of space and was easier. People are now using these not for teaching directly, but for referencing, for research. Now, by chance, I found, looking through the wonderful internet and the world, the web, I was just looking for gloss text so I could have some images. And this actually is the gloss text of the Maccabees that we showed at the beginning, and it's in the exact same place. The first folio that I showed from Scripture, and here you have the first initial, and then the text, and this is all the gloss around that one. So were so ubiquitous that I shouldn't have been surprised to find one, but finding an exact match was a minor thrill in life. Just to show you that this type of commentary, not exactly a gloss, but the style of the printing are from two leaves, and I'm showing one recto and verso of the Odes of Horace. And this is from the 16th century. And again, you see this type of commentary on the outside and the primary text in the interior square. And it's just an easy way to do this. We do footnotes, and sometimes I think if you're thinking about this, this is probably easier than the footnotes because it's closer to the actual word. But you have variation, as you can see, in these two text blocks. There must be more commentary here and less commentary here so they could get more verses in these odes from Horace. The second text we'd like to look at in some detail are Peter Lombard's four books of the sentences. Like the Glossa Ordinaria, the sentences began to appear between 1155 and 1158. Peter Lombard was an Italian, he's from Lombardy, became Bishop of Paris, and his work became, the four books of sentences, became the standard textbook of Catholic theology during the Middle Ages and into the early modern period. In the Middle Ages, at the medieval university A course of lectures on Lombard sentences was required of every master or candidate for the master's degree in theology. And so we have sentence commentaries are a dime a dozen, great dissertation projects. We probably have hundreds, if not thousands, of extant sentence commentaries or pieces from them. This text is very small. If you haven't, be sure to go in to see the exhibit, because these slides really distort your impression of the size of these texts. These are really small. This text is 9 inches by 6.45 inches. That's not too big, but not too small. But the text block, this area where the text is actually provided, is only 4.3 by 3 inches. So it's very, very small. And of course, the question you want to ask is, well, why didn't they fill out the page? It's easier to read. I mean, yes, you want a small book to carry it around. You don't want to have to, like, they didn't have knapsacks. Sometimes they had servants to carry their books. They didn't have these huge knapsacks of books. But the only reason I think you could adduce to say why it's so small is maybe they wanted the space for comments. And of course, if you know the commentator on the text, it's very fruitful for students of medieval theology to know who wrote what and then who commented on what that person wrote. And so finding notes are very, very wonderful. However, we have no notes here. Here are the 2 pages. This is the recto, and this is the verso. And I will go to the detail of this. And this is the one, this very sheet, you want to look back in the back corner to see how similar they are. And what will catch your attention is this number here. Now, the text in the back of the room is from Scripture, probably the book of Isaiah. And this is a sentence commentary, so they probably aren't from the same book, but there's so many other correspondences that you might think they're from the same workshop. They're from about the same time. This is 1240, about 1240, and that's about 1250. So it could be the same scribe or the same workshop. What I'd like to highlight for this small folio is the effort made by the copyist to allow for quick reference. This text is interesting that Peter Lombard's sentences was divided into 4 books. Each book was further divided into distinctions, and each distinction divided into chapters. And then we have in this manuscript each chapter sometimes marked at logical points, but there's no verse numbers of the chapter. So whoever was the scribe was marking logical points in the text. This is from Book 2 of Peter Lombard's Book of 4 Sentences, and it presents the conclusion of Distinction 27 and the beginning of Book 28. And the scribes were very helpful. If you look at the top, you see a red and blue 2, which was to indicate Book 2 of the sentences. Over here in the first corner, the upper left-hand text block, you have a D, which stands for Distinctio. And over here, you have a 28 in Arabic numbers to communicate quickly the distinction number. You have over here in the left-hand column a very extravagance, too strong a word, but a very present distinction number. So, and you see the alternating red and blue, and that catches your attention. And that's the distinction 28 in Roman numerals. Then you have, in this column here, on a 1 and a 2, that again is to number the chapters within the distinction. However, this was probably added by a later hand. It doesn't seem to jive, though the ink is fairly brown, but not the same as the ink in the text block. You have the sections there, these little sections with the red cross through. It's just to call your attention to these points. And then you have the little chapter headings. And so if you look in a commentary, edition of Peter Lombard's sentences, you'll see that whoever the editor is has placed in a little quick guide to the contents. And so this must have been done, I can't find the text anyplace. I can find the text of the distinction and the like, but these little red comments must have been the scribe's way, or whoever he was preparing the text for, his way of determining what the content is. And there may have been a standard list of these contents, but they don't show up. You also have pen flourishing here, alternating red and blue, and these pen flourishings again signal the different chapters of the distinction. So what you have also, let's see if I can find one, Augustine, the text talks about the fall and grace, and this particular distinction deals with Pelagius, who was Pelagian, and they were worried about how can you pull yourself up? Can you need grace to do this, or can you do it by yourself? And that tangle has gone on for centuries. These pen flourishings are extravagant signals for the chapters, and they have in alternating blue and red. Here you have the first initial, but then the pen flourishing is in blue, and then you have pen flourishing here in red around the blue initial. All of this is so that you can visually comprehend the text very, very quickly and find what you need to use. So they're very, very practical arrangements of abstruse arguments. Everyone had to write lectures based on Peter Lombard's commentary. Now, frequently, they just took the topic and made it a different topic, made it the same topic, but a different explanation. And we have in the collection Thomas Aquinas' commentary on Lombard's sentences, and this is in a modern edition from, again, 1497, but from Venice. And it's a little bit easier to read, but it has the same type of distinctions in the pages, that is, ways to approach the text. In this section, I'd like to look at, to see what do these, oh, excuse me. What I'd like to ask first is the topic, the title of the talk is on what do these documents tell us about the Middle Ages. So for these first two, the Glossa Ordinaria and Peter Lombard's sentences, this is what I suggest that they can tell us. First of all, we have to remember that what we're talking about is Scripture. For most of its medieval history, and frequently beyond, encountering the biblical text on its own was as good as impossible. And the question is why? Because sacred Scripture differed from merely human literary productions through a depth of meaning which demanded elaborate apparatuses of theological commentary. That is, the word was so deep that we poor humans can't approach it directly. This is very Catholic instead of Reformation, that it has to be mediated because it's so difficult to read and comprehend that you need to be guided in your reading. And so these types of glosses and sentence commentaries were this thick understanding of what Scripture had for you to say on the different levels. The clarifications of inspired and authorized interpreters were indispensable, and the production of texts reflected this. Manuscripts and early printed editions of the Bible were often, but not always, encased in so many layers that the words of the biblical text seem mere islands in a sea awash with commentary and or aids to understanding or reference. Approaching the text without reference to, or at least awareness of, the authoritative commentaries of church fathers and others was literally impossible. It was just too much for us to comprehend, and we need all the help we can get. And this has led, of course, to a very, very rich understanding of the Scriptures that is guided by the church through their choice of fathers and commentators that were made available to Christians. We now, of course, don't read the Scripture that way, but we always have, at the monastery, at vigils, we always have the first reading is from Scripture, and the second nocturne has a reading from a patristic father explaining that. So we still have the same framework for understanding is through the fathers. Okay. Now, the second section that I'd like to bring to your attention this afternoon is liturgy and private prayer. The Karen Gould collection numbers 17 folios presenting items from liturgical books such as the Breviary, a Graduale, Missal, and Psalter. And it also has folios from 9 books of hours, which make it a very rich vehicle for understanding, seeing, getting a feel for what the medievals thought and wanted and loved. So this afternoon I want to examine a leaf from a calendar, right here, a book of hours from the 15th century, and also a very, very interesting text for the Feast of the Visitation of the Blessed Virgin that comes from the 15th century as well. Here's the number, if you have the text there, or the handout. From the mid-13th to the mid-16th centuries, more books of hours were commissioned and produced, bought and sold, bequeathed and inherited, printed and reprinted than any other text, including the Bible. From the late Middle Ages, the Book of Hours is the book. And you have very expensive books of hours, you have inexpensive books of hours, but everyone wanted to have a book of hours. One of the reasons for the popularity of the Book of Hours lies in the book's primary contents, the Hours of the Virgin, a sequence of prayers recited throughout the course of the day, sanctifying the day through Mary to God, hour by hour. Other prayers included in books of the hours usually helped round out the spiritual needs of late medieval and Renaissance men and women, the penitential psalms, the office of the dead, and various other accessory prayers. Now, you have before you this parchment, which is from the 15th century. It's made of translucent parchment, and this is expensive parchment. It's better quality. It's fairly white, and you see all these dark spots. I thought that was originally from the, I don't know if you ever saw the article about the scholar in London had decided that she could measure use of leaves in a book by checking the amount of crud, pardon the expression, on the book. And she used a densitometer to say this book was used. And I thought, oh great, this is, but no, it's the quality of the parchment has it in there, and maybe the photography and the like, but this is the color of the parchment. It's not dirty by grubby hands. It's kind of understandable. Sometimes these books were just used for show. You didn't necessarily have to pray it. I suppose you had spasms of piety, but sometimes you must have one because it's chic to have it. It's like a Kindle or an iPad or something. You have it. Now, if you look at this text, this is from the month of May. And this, is the I think there are 3 vernacular texts in the collection, and this is one of the 3. In French, it says May has 30 days, and 31 days, and the moon has 30 days. And you can see, too, that you have alternating blue and red and gold saints. The golds are for the great feasts, and the blue and red are just nice saints who are commemorated on that day, and you have visual alternation of the text. if you look here for St. Pancras, St. Pancras was a martyr. Most of them were. They were not a dime a dozen, but quite a few martyrs who were worked into the liturgy, regional, whatever. So, thinking myself brilliant, I looked at St. Pancras. There's a set called the Le Roquet breviaries in French, and it lists all the breviaries in the French libraries, the National Bibliothèque Nationale and the other local municipal libraries. And this St. Pancras shows up in only 2 breviaries. And so you can use, when you have a breviary, you look at the saints and you say, where did this come from? Well, one of the ways is finding out which saints were venerated in that region. So I saw St. Pancras, and it's in 2 dioceses of Auxerre, and Poitiers is the other one. And I thought, great, I've lived, no one's found this, I found it, we're going to write it up, and I'll get another degree or something. However, I made this great edifice built on sand. Consuelo Dutsky, who runs the digital scriptorium, said to me, interesting, but no. Here's the problem. When you have a text like this, yes, here you have the whole month. Every day is filled. Every day is filled. And when you begin to look at the individual saints, you say, this is out of place. This saint was celebrated in April, or this saint was included on this text because his name is close to the other one. Or the guy was so confused he didn't know up from down and misread it or whatever. And Consuelo said that when you have a text like this, a calendar block that is full, what you really have is a scribe trying to have a beautiful text block that is completely full. I have a 15th century calendar of Jean Carpentin, done by the master of the, where can you find it? The master of the Dresden Prayer Book. This was done in the 1470s. And you can see here it's the same month. You have Gemini at the top. You have writing out here. But you can see that in this, it's a very expensive manuscript, very well done. You can see that many of the feasts, the days are blank. And so when you go back to our text, our folios, you see that, well, probably this didn't work. Now, if you look at some of them, however, they're very interesting. This is St. Judas Kyriakos, and he was a Jewish Christian, or a Jew who converted to Christianity. He was always celebrated on the day after the feast of the invention, the finding of the Holy Cross by St. Helena. And he supposedly went up to St. Helena and said, dig here, you'll find the cross. And she dug there, and then they verified them by holding the cross over sick people. The sick person was healed. And so, voila, you had the true cross, which has been split up and sent around the world. Judas Kyriakos was celebrated the day after, because of his association with St. Helena and the invention of the Holy Cross. But then if you look here, I don't know if you can read this, this is another saint named St. Garen, or Q-U-R-Quirin, which might be a German, there's a German St. Quirin than Irish. But what may have happened, here's Judas Kyriake, here's St. Quirin, and here's the invention of the Holy Cross. And St. Quirin was celebrated in April. And he had a terrible death and the like, but he had nothing to do with the invention of the Holy Cross or St. Helena or St. Judas Kyriakos. And here we have this St. Quirin was tortured by being sawn in half under the Diocletian persecutions. So you can see that this text, well, it has interesting people in it and interesting names. It is not really an accurate, you could not use it for your prayer. Well, you could, I suppose, but if there's any consonance between the day and the feast, you'd miss it. we do have St. Torpes of Pisa, who here on this page, right here, and this really means Saint-Tropez. And it's the feast of the patron saint of the city of Saint-Tropez, where his body was left in the light. And so I put a nice slide in there of Saint-Tropez. And down here you have the feast of Saint Petronille. And she was supposedly the daughter of Petronille, Saint Peter. And she had her own history, and of course it's all created. They're not lying, but they're creating stories out of these texts. It's always surprising for seminary students, our monastery as a college, to find out that these things are made up. And they get nervous about that. And you just say, well, they're telling the truth rather than fact. Or they're, just like you have disquisitions in Luke, these stories, the infancy narratives are meditations on the life of Christ. We don't believe they really happened, at least I don't. But they're nice stories, and they tell truth about Christ and his mission and his message. Okay, and the last text we want to look at is a breviary. And this is my favorite of the text. It is for the Feast of the Visitation of the Blessed Virgin Mary. But first let me talk to you, mention what a breviary is. In the 13th century, the breviary received the technical sense of a book containing all the parts of the divine office, the liturgy of the hours that the clergy sang throughout the day and the monks sang throughout the day. The breviary was usually in a portable form, so that's why you have small folios in the exhibit, because the book was made to be carried around. Monks didn't use it because they were in their monastery, but Franciscans and other beggar types wandered around and needed a book to pray from. It's always fun in a monastery to make fun of Franciscans. We don't make fun of Dominicans, but we do of Franciscans. This is the text that you see in the exhibit. It is an Italian text from the 15th century. Again, it's parchment, and you can see the dimensions of the block of the whole page. It's only 5 inches by 4 1/4 inches. 4 1/4 inches, and the text block is only 3.4 inches by 6. So you have a very, very small and portable text. The image here is manipulated to give it more color and visible imagery, because the text in the exhibit is too small and it's not as vivid as this. These things are hundreds of years old and they've aged, especially when they're separated out. They're in the book and the book is kept closed. The leaves are usually in pretty good shape, but when they're ripped apart and sold for filthy lucre, you do have damage to the text and the transmission passing from one person to the other. It's no longer moral in the art world to tear books apart, to sell them pages one by one. You can always make more money off the individual pages than you could if you were selling the whole book. So these book dealers will buy these and then separate them. And usually nowadays they say, we don't separate folio leaves out. The ones we're selling were already done. We didn't do it. And then they say another weasel factor is, we don't rip apart manuscripts that have been, no, if a manuscript has been not destroyed, but taken apart already, but we have the most of it, by the fact that one is gone, one folio is gone, we can sell the rest of it, which is dastardly. That was a D, a dastardly. Now, the office, this is the office for the visitation of the Blessed Virgin. In 1389, Pope Boniface IX decreed that the entire church should celebrate the Feast of the Visitation. In other places it had been celebrated, but on individual dioceses or a house, monastery, and the like would celebrate it, but it wasn't for the official church, for the whole church. So Boniface decreed that the entire church should celebrate the Feast of the Visitation, and he chose a text from, he had 8 different offices that were submitted or gathered, and he chose one text for his own that he thought would work the best. The text chosen, this is for First Vespers, and you have the antiphons and the like. Antiphons are texts that's a shorter text that bracket the Psalter. You're singing a psalm, and you start first with an antiphon and sing the verses of the psalm, and then repeat the antiphon at the end. We still do that in the office. You have to pay attention to the antiphon, the first letters of the antiphons. And we'll show you later, but that's what we're looking for. That's what you want, the antiphon. Remember that. All this other stuff, the reading, the hymn, versicle response, Magnificat antiphon, etc. I think the Magnificat antiphon is important, but the prayer at the end of the office is not. And I'll show you why. Here's the verso. And you have the morning vigil. Matins is the morning office, and you'll have nocturnes and matins. And on this one, you would have 3 nocturnes, which is every monk's despair, because it means you sing a longer office, and it gets longer and longer, and you're ready to go. Now, there is extant this wonderful, unfortunately not in our collection here, but this wonderful folio from the collection of the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And this is a text from Venice from about 1400. And in the initial here, the A, here, you have the historiated initial of the Visitation. The Visitation was from the book of Luke, Gospel of Luke, where Mary went to visit her pregnant cousin, Elizabeth. Elizabeth was the wife of Zachary, who was struck dumb after kind of questioning what the angel told him to do. So in certain ways, these things are connected, indirectly, but they're connected. Down at the bottom, whoops, I'm gonna look up it. Down at the bottom here of the page, you have a picture of 3 figures. The first figure is St. Dominic, supposedly. The second figure is another, might be Peter Martyr, because he holds a palm branch in his hand. The palm branch was an iconographical symbol for martyrs. And he's a Dominican. And then you have in the middle the most interesting person, a cardinal. He's dressed in his cardinalatial scarlet robes. He holds a book in one hand and a church in the other, a model of a church, probably his titular church in Rome, Santa Cecilia, which is the saint for singing and music. Now, Adam Easton holds this book, and so the guess is, and actually we know, that Adam Easton, a Benedictine cardinal, a graduate and doctor of theology from Oxford, wrote the text for the Feast of the Visitation. Well, you say, fine, that's very interesting. But at that time, and this is interesting to me anyway, at that time, if you wrote a liturgical text, your name was not supposed to be associated with it. It was something that was a gift to God, and that you didn't take any personal glory out of it. You see the same with painters before Giotto, where they weren't named. Every once in a while a sculptor, maybe Gieslerbertus or something like that. But generally, you did not have your name attached to it. And this is still active today. Our abbot, Gregory, translated the Psalter that's in use in the Roman Catholic Church now in the Anglophone world. And it's used in Britain, in British Isle, in Africa, where they have English-speaking people. And he did this as a work of love for the church, but he published the Psalter with his name on it, Gregory Poland, OSB, and the monks of Conception Abbey, because there was a team of us who helped him with the translation. Well, after it was published, he received a letter from the Holy See complaining that he had attached his name to this translation. And so you see that this type of thing lives on forever, that it's supposed to be an anonymous work offered for the glory of God. And Evan Gregory was embarrassed all the way to the bank. It's been a great money raiser for the monastery because, well, it can't be, we don't get any income from the text used in the missal or stuff that's used by the bishops and the like in the liturgy. We do get income from any other sales connected with using our Psalter, like missalettes. I don't know how many are Catholics, but missalettes are ubiquitous in Catholic churches. Just have one leaf, so you can't get the before and after. But here, in this text, we have the M, and that's A-D-A-M, Adam, C-A-R-D-I, Adam Cardinalis. And so we all know who wrote it, and he got his glory on earth and in heaven. And this was the most interesting find here. The others were interesting, but I got a kick out of this, especially because he's a Benedictine and pulled one over the Holy See. Now, what do these two folios tell us about the Middle Ages? The text at the core of any book of ours, of course, is sacred scripture. And it is the sacred scripture contained in the breviary and recited by the clergy during the celebration of the divine office. The text of a book of hours is not the only element in a book of hours that is a witness to lay appropriation of clerical habits and values. Many of the offices, prayers, and devotional works found in books of hours originated in a clerical milieu or represent systematizations or reformulations of clerical forms of spirituality, foremost among which was the effective meditation on the humanity and suffering of Christ in the Passion. More importantly, for our purposes today, a typical book of hours contains significant amounts of scripture. It has a calendar, to be sure, an excerpt, however, from each of the four Gospels, the little office of the Blessed Virgin, which has psalms and canticles from Scripture, the 15 Psalms of Ascent, the 7 penitential psalms, litanies of the saints, which were not scriptural, office for the dead, psalms and canticles, hours of the cross, psalms and canticles, and various other prayers. So this afternoon, we've been seeking for what the Gould collection can tell us about the world of the Middle Ages and about the world of sacred scripture. That sacred scripture, as I remarked at the beginning of my presentation, the language and logic of which played an overwhelming role in both shaping the form of the medieval world and its institution, and in serving the church now and then as the living foundation for its theology and liturgy. Thank you. Value added. Oops, that's not value added. Just if you want to look, the collection is very heavy in manuscripts. The most of them come from Italy, but France is a close second. 21 of the 31 are from the 15th century. And why? Because there are more of them. They're easier to collect. They're less expensive because they're all over the place. And finally, you have 8 liturgical texts, 9 manuscript folios from books of hours, and 14 other sources. So that's what you have. But now, this is a teaching collection. And as Marilyn mentioned, we've been adding folios to the collection. And the team of people making the suggestions say, okay, what does this collection need? Where do we need to fill it out? Because the students who will come will be either studying paleography or studying church history or studying theology in the Middle Ages, whatever cultural courses in the Middle Ages. And so they'll be able to look at these. So, let's see if I can do this. There have been new additions that Marilyn mentioned. The first is a notarial document, a loan record. And in this record, a man named Johannes Antonius de Sala confessed, or really just said, I owe you, to 3 brothers. And we haven't had a chance to transcribe the text and the like, but we'll be working on that. So that's Italian, but it's a notarial record. And there's nothing like that in the collection as it stands now. The second is a very, very interesting printed parchment leaf. So it's not printed on paper, it's printed on parchment. And it contains prayers with illustrated borders. It is hand illuminated, or it's probably not the right word, but hand colored to add. What they're trying to do is reproduce a manuscript. It's not like, oh, we want this new technology. No, we want the new technology to provide experiences of the text that are from the earlier experience. Just like people read Kindles, but Kindles are set up so the pages go, and they're trying to imitate the new technology, the old technology, because people are more comfortable with it. This is, if I have this correctly, it's probably a book of hours owned by a woman. We haven't figured out what the text exactly is. It has offices from known and sext on the recto with references to Pentecost. So it'll be fun to look at this type of text. At home, at Conception, we have parchment that has printed notes on it. And the previous librarian had said this is a fake medieval manuscript, but actually it's a medieval book of hours, divine office book, that was printed with hand blocks, but big letters. And it looked fake, but it's real, it's transitional. The third text is a lovely, this is one that's a pending purchase, but it may be on its way over. It's an illuminated missal in Latin. It's vellum. It has a large painted initial R here, and it has a beautiful gold background with alternating red and blue blocking the text. It's from Germany, from the second half of the 15th century. And the last text is called the Polychronicon. It's by Ranulph Higden. It's from England, Westminster, and it was printed by Caxton. Caxton is an early and important printer, and so it was printed sometime after the 2nd of July, 1482. It's very interesting with a lot of these, you know the exact day the book was printed, because they wrote that in the text. This is Middle English translation by John of Trevisa, who was a monk of Chester, who's a Benedictine, and so I'm sure it's a perfect translation. And this too was modernized by William Caxton, so these are great introductions or additions to our new collection. So, thank you.
Thank you all for coming. Brother Thomas will be available to talk about individual pages, or if you have any questions in the gallery, and there is a reception in the back.
I'm happy to do it.